Hello and welcome to Learning Economics. Today we shall discuss consumer behavior. This is our first lecture on this topic. In this lecture, we shall talk about households' decisions about consumption and saving, consuming different commodities, and about work and leisure choices. We shall discuss what trade-offs consumers face in these decisions and what are the determinants of these choices. Then we shall discuss the consumer choice, discuss the constraint that consumers face, and then discuss the consumer utility through Cardinal approach. So let's start with the lecture. Students, as we know that there are four economic agents that derive the whole economy. First, households or consumers. Next, firms or producers. Then, government, and then the rest of the world. Households or consumers consume goods and services and provide input for the production. Firms and producers produce goods and hire inputs for the production. Government provides and guards economic system and regulates economy. It also collects taxes and make expenditures. We are connected with the rest of the world through international trade. Now let's talk about households' decision. Students, given the scarcity of income and of time, a household has to choose on which goods to consume and which not to consume. It has also to choose on the quantity of the goods a household is consuming. Similarly, a household has also make a decision about consumption and saving, that is, how much income to consume and how much to save. And it has also make a decision between work and leisure, that is, how many hours a day to work and how many hours a day to enjoy leisure. Now we talk about consumption decisions. The factors that determine the consumption of different commodities are prices of the goods and services, flow of the income, stock of the wealth, taste and preferences, and future expectation. However, for the rest of the lecture, we shall take the prices of the goods, the flow of income, the stock of the wealth, and the future expectations as given, and we shall mainly talk about taste and preferences. In choosing what to consume and what not to consume, households face a constraint. This is because no household has unlimited income or wealth. Therefore, the expenditures should be equal to or less than the financial resources available. Given household has no opportunity to borrow. We discuss this in budget constraint, which represents the boundaries of purchasing and consuming commodities given the income and prices. In other words, the budget constraint divides whole of the commodities in two groups. One which a consumer can afford and other which are unaffordable given the prices and the income of the household. So, for two goods X and Y, the budget constraint can be written as X into price of X plus Y into price of Y. That is, total expenditures on good X and Y should be equal to the budget. We can also write it as let the price of X is rupees 20, price of Y is rupees 10 and total budget available is of rupees 100. Now, if the consumer does not consume commodity X, he can spend all of the budget on good Y and can purchase 10 units of it. If a consumer purchases 1 unit of good X, then the total expenditures on good X will be rupees 20 and rupees 80 will be left to be spent on good Y. Given this, consumer can purchase 8 units of good Y. Similarly, if consumer purchases 2 units of good X, he or she can purchase 6 units of good Y. If 3 units of good X, then 4 units of good Y, and if 5 units of good X, then he has no income left to be spent on good Y. Representing this on a graph, we have the budget line. This line represents what maximum quantities of good X and Y a consumer can purchase. To understand about this curve, let's solve it for y-axis variable, that is for good Y. This gives us the intercept and the slope. All the area under this curve represents those bundles of two goods that a consumer can afford given the prices of the commodities and income of the consumer. These bundles form choice set or opportunity set. In other words, an opportunity set or choice set represents all combination of the commodities that are available to the consumer and he or she can purchase them given his budget and prices. So, the opportunity set is defined as Now let's see what happens when there is a change in income or in the price. Students, as we can see from this equation that change in income or budget will change the intercept. So when the income increases, we can intuitively say that consumer can afford more quantities of both goods. Therefore, the budget line shifts to the right, whereas the slope remains the same. However, when the price of a good, say X, changes, there is a change in the slope. If the price of good X decreases, the consumer can now purchase more of the maximum quantity of good X that he or she could afford previously. Therefore, the budget line rotates and its slope changes. Now we discuss consumer preferences or choices. The first question before us is why a consumer consumes different goods or services. Economists say that a consumer consumes different commodities in different quantities to get satisfaction from those goods or services. This satisfaction which a consumer gets by consuming a commodity is called utility. There are broadly two approaches that discuss utility. First is called Cardinal approach and second is called Ordinal approach. In this lecture, we shall discuss the Cardinal approach, whereas Ordinal approach will be discussed in the next lecture. Students, the Cardinal approach says that utility depends on the quantity of the goods consumed. That is, utility is the function of quantity of consumed good. And within a limit, there is a positive relation. That is, if you increase the consumption of the good, the utility increases. The other assumption of Cardinal approach is that utility is measurable. This means that as we measure the distance between 2 points, the weight of any good or the height of any building, in similar way we can also measure the utility, and the unit for this is util. Now, to measure the utility, the money is assumed to be the measuring rod. That is, we say that to get a commodity, how much unit of money a person is ready to sacrifice is equal to the utils of the utility that a person will get from consuming this commodity. That is, the utility in utils is measured by the willingness to spend on that commodity. If a person is willing to spend large amount of money on a good, it indicates that it gives him or her higher utility. Now, because the measuring rod is money, so the utility of money is assumed to be constant. And lastly, but most importantly, we assume that consumer is rational. Now, before we proceed, it is better to have a clear understanding of basic terms of this approach. We already defined utility as the satisfaction that a consumer derives from consuming a commodity. So, the total utility is the total amount of satisfaction that a consumer gets by consuming a certain quantity of a commodity. For example, if you ate 3 bananas in breakfast, then the sum of the utility that you derived from first, second and third banana is the total utility of consuming 3 bananas. Whereas marginal utility is the change in total utility due to consumption of one additional unit of the commodity. That is, for example, you received total 20 units of utility by consuming 3 bananas. Now you ate fourth and your total utility became 22. So the marginal utility of fourth banana will be 2. Mathematically, we can write it as change in utility divided by change in quantity. To understand the behavior of total and marginal utility, let's assume that a thirsty person starts drinking water. The person is very thirsty. He is given a glass of water. The person drinks it. He will get very high satisfaction because his desire for water was at extreme. Let's say his total utility is equal to 15 utils. He is represented with one more glass of water. So, drinking the second glass of water, he will get some more utility, but not as much as it was on the first glass, because now the thirst level was not as much higher as it was before drinking first glass. So we assume his utility increased from 15 to 25. Similarly, on third glass, he also received some utility. Say the total utility reached 30. On fourth glass, his thirst was no longer there. So he received. If you force him or her to drink fifth glass, his total utility will not increase. In fact, because the consumer is feeling uncomfortable with it, so the total utility will fall. Now, from the change of consumption to 0 glass of water to 1 glass, the change in total utility is of 15 units. From first to second glass, the change in total utility is of 10 units, and so on. This is what we call marginal utility. Plotting on the graph, we represent the number of glasses on x-axis and the utility on y-axis. We can see that the total utility first increases, but it is increasing at decreasing rate. It reaches a maximum point and then starts falling. Whereas the marginal utility is falling right from the start. It starts from a positive number and goes on to decrease until it becomes negative. We can also see that in the region where marginal utility is positive, the total utility is rising. When marginal utility became 0, the total utility reached its maximum. And when marginal utility became negative, the total utility starts falling. From this, we can derive the law of diminishing marginal utility, which states that as a consumer goes on consuming a commodity, the marginal utility goes on to decrease, given other things remain the same. Now we see the case of maximizing utility in case of consumption of more than one commodities. Let's assume that A consumer purchases two goods X and Y. The income or the budget available is of rupees 10, whereas the prices of good X and Y are rupees 2. The table represents the marginal utility of good X and marginal utility of good Y. We can see that if consumer spends all of his income on good X, he can purchase 5 units of it. So the total utility from the 5 units of X will be 12 plus 10 plus 8 plus 6 plus 4, that is of 40 units. No consumption of good Y can be made, therefore no utility from good possibility can be is that consumer spends rupees 8 on X and rupees 2 on Y. That is, the consumer purchases 1 unit of good Y and 4 units of good X. In this case, the total utility received from good X will be equal to 12 plus 10 plus 8 plus 6, and the total utility received from second good will be 10, summing up 46 utils. So the second option is better than the first. Now the third option is spending 6 rupees on good X and 4 on good Y. That is, consuming 3 units of good X and 2 units of good Y. In this case, the total utility derived from good X will be of 30 utils and from good Y will be of 18 units, making it a total of 48 units. This utility is highest among the three bundles. Next option is of spending rupees 4 on X and rupees 6 on Y. So from this consumption, the total utility derived will be of 46 utils. Next option is spending 2 on X and 8 on Y, and last option is spending 0 on X and 10 on Y. The total utility derived from these two options is 40 utils and 30 utils respectively. Consumers' aim is to maximize the utility, and we can see that the utility is maximized when consumer purchases 3 units of good X and spends rupees 6 on it, and purchases 2 units of good Y and spends 4 rupees on it. We can see that in this way, the marginal utility derived from last unit of money spent on X is 8, and marginal utility derived from last unit of money spent on Y is also 8. So we can conclude that total utility is maximum when a consumer spends his or her income on different commodities in such a way that marginal utility of last unit of money spent on all commodities is equal. This principle is also called law of equi-marginal utility. This can easily be extended to any number of commodities with different prices, as far as For the last unit of each commodity, the ratio of marginal utility to price should be same among all commodities. Graphing marginal utility of X and Y, we can see that the utility maximizing bundle contains 3 units of X and 2 units of Y, spending rupees 6 on X and rupees 4 on Y. However, if a consumer deviates and say spends rupees 8 on X and rupees 2 on Y, the gain in the utility from consuming more X is less than the loss in the utility from consuming less of Y. Therefore, the total utility will decrease. Now, let's take another example of law of equi-marginal utility, in which the prices of the goods are different. Let's assume that a person has a choice of playing a basketball game with a participation fee of rupees 6 per game and going to club which costs rupees 3. The total budget is of rupees 21. The marginal utilities from the trips to the club per week and basketball games per week is given. Since the prices are different, so we should first calculate marginal utility per unit of money in both cases. This is calculated by dividing the marginal utility on the price of the commodity. For example, a trip to club costs rupees 3. Therefore, the marginal utility of 1 rupee from the first trip to the club will be 4, and the basketball game costs rupees 6. So the marginal utility of 1 rupee spent on first basketball game will be 3.5. Therefore, the first spending should be made on club because it gives higher marginal utility per unit of money. So rupees 3 will be spent on the club. Next, the consumer on the second weekend can go to the club. It will be his second trip to the club and the marginal utility per unit of money will be 3.3. Whereas if he goes to play basketball, this will be his first match and marginal utility of playing basketball per unit of money will be 3.5. Clearly, the person should go for basketball game and spend rupees 6 on it and get a utility of 21. Now, the third weekend. Consumer can go to the club. The second trip to the club will give him utility of 3.3, whereas the second basketball game will give him the utility of 2. Therefore, the trip to the club will be preferable. Up till now, there are 2 trips to the club, which means the total cost will be of 6. There is one basketball game costing rupees 6. So out of 21, 12 rupees have been spent. Now the fourth weekend. Consumer can go to the club. This will give him 2 utils of marginal utility per unit of money. He can go to the basketball, play the second game because he has already played one. So again, the marginal utility per unit of money is also 2 utils. Both are same, so consumer can either spend his income on basketball or can go to the club. Assume that consumer decides to play the basketball game. He spends rupees 6 on it, gets a marginal utility of 12. So up till now, he had made 2 trips to the club costing rupees 6 and has played 2 basketball games costing rupees 12, making it to 18. So for the last 3, he has again choice of going to the club and getting a marginal utility per unit of money of 2 or playing a basketball game. Let's assume he can go, but if he can go, then he will get a utility of 1.5, which is less than 2. So given the budget and also given the utility, the consumer should prefer going to the club, and he will consume his last 3 rupees and get marginal utility per unit of money equal to 2 utils. Therefore, spending all the income in rational way, the consumer should make 3 trips to the club and enjoy 2 basketball games to maximize his or her utility. Now, we can also see that the utility of last unit of money spent on trip to the club and utility of last unit of money spent on playing basketball game is same. Therefore, the law of equi-marginal utility guarantees maximizing utility if a consumer spends his income on different goods in such a way that marginal utility over price ratio should be same for the last unit of all the commodities. Students, the cardinal utility approach is criticized on various grounds. Some of these are: number 1, critics say that cardinal measurement of utility is impossible. That is, a person cannot measure his or her utility in cardinal units like the person measures other quantities such as weight, length, height, etc. It is because the utility is attached with the feelings, and we can not measure the feelings like we measure physical quantities. Next is, the marginal utility of money is not constant. It depends on the situation and also on how much money you have. The marginal utility of money for a very rich person may be very low, and for a poor person may be very high. Similarly, the cross effects, that is, the effect of change in price of one commodity on the demand of other commodity, are also ignored. We know that goods are grouped as substitutes as well as complements. However, this approach ignores it. Similarly, we see that the price effect, which the law of demand states, is the combination of income effect and substitution effect. However, using cardinal approach, it is very difficult to measure how much is the income effect and how much is the substitution effect. That is all for this lecture. Please post your questions and give your feedback in comments. Also consider liking and sharing the video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you and goodbye.